Oh, now you can't see a poll. Okay. I can't see many people due to how I've got my screen set up. So is one of the weird things about webinars. So I'm afraid I can't tell you. Let me maybe the poll's only visible to people that had joined beforehand. Okay. Sometimes it does depend on what kind of technology you're on as well. So brilliant. Well, welcome all of you. Let's see if anyone. Yeah, the strange thing about webinars is I don't get to see you, unfortunately, which is always a shame. But I'm here, I'm Laura. Hello and welcome to tonight's webinar. Please use the chat as much as you like. We also have a question and answer function. So I will check in as and when I can into the questions and take time to answer them as we go through. And again, the same with the chat as well, as far as I can. I believe, I'm not sure if you can wave or do signals like you can sometimes in the webinar, the Zoom meetings, but if so, please do, let me know if I'm going too fast or too slowly, or just if you've got questions, if I'm not making sense, because the purpose of the next hour is to be useful to you. And that's what it's all about. So this webinar here was funded by the Opportunity Area Fund, and that's a fund that is supporting Peterborough, East Cambs area in the main, but they've encouraged us to open it up to anyone, any parent who feels like it could be useful to them. So that's a little bit of background as to why we're doing it tonight. I'm Laura. My background is mostly working for the local authority in a range of roles that are psychology based. So from youth offending team to working with families who are struggling to working as a systemic clinician. And I'm also work with trauma that's held in the body as well. So that's me. And I'm now really, really enjoying my role as the training and development coordinator for YMCA Trinity. Okay, what I'm going to do now is share my screen. I hope that it'll all be clearly be visible to you, and we'll go through the presentation. So I should hopefully see when, yeah, I can still see the chat. So hopefully that will flag up and I can stop and have a look as we go. But hopefully you can all see my front page, which is front page to tonight's talk, parenting tips for when you aren't feeling physically or mentally well. And we decided that this was an important topic because we often don't talk about how sometimes how we feel makes life a bit more complicated and a bit harder. And in particular, it's not always easy to talk about it in terms of how it affects our interactions with our children or how it affects our children just on their own. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about that and try and explore some ideas and some tips and some different ways of thinking about things that will hopefully be helpful to you as we go through it. So from what I can see with the poll, actually there's a real range of parenting ages here, pretty much covering all of them. And that as a group, you're suffering both from individually physical or mental health, but also for many of you both is what is characterizing your life at the moment. So thank you for sharing that information. That's great. Do I have experience with kinship and traumatized children? Yeah, in past roles I have done, and I have worked less so with kinship, but more with the traumatized children. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we're going to look at things that we can think about and put into place when we're feeling under the weather. And we're also going to look a little bit about how we can, I guess, be gentle and be kind to ourselves as we go. through our life and through day-to-day, everyday life. But the focus is on how we can balance our own needs with those of our children, and in particular, how we hold our children in mind. And that is a really key skill. It's really important for our children to know that we're thinking of them, that we think of them even if they're not there with us, and that we're holding them in mind. So webinar guidelines, fairly standard, non-judgmental, accepting attitude. Do use the question and answer function, because I will be able to spend some time writing answers as well if you don't want me to speak about the question out loud. And you can rate questions that have come in from other people as well. And hold in mind you and your child and your interactions, because you're the people, you're the experts on both yourself and your children. Be gentle with yourself tonight. It's been a really tricky few years, and for many of us, might have been tricky for an awful lot longer as well. But whilst we've all been going through the same storm, we've not all been in the same boat. And, for some of us, it would have been much harder to manage and deal with the pressures and the stresses that are going on with. And that's the same also for our children. So please do be gentle with yourself. If you need to take a break, stretch, move, so on, please do. The objectives: how illness affects your parenting, what is good enough parenting, how to balance those of our needs with those of our children. And I think as well a little bit around how and when to seek help from others, because that can be really quite a difficult thing to do and really tricky. And there's some sort of breaking it down sometimes is quite useful as well. So they're the 4 main areas that we're going to cover today. So illness, I thought we'd start with a shared definition so we all know what we're talking about. And what illness is it's a state of dis-ease, where something is uncomfortable, not right, not working functionally or effectively in our body and or in our mind at the same time. And speaking quite generically, we have chronic illnesses, which are long-term. They can sometimes be managed. They have a range of different effects into different areas of our lives. Or they're acute, they're shorter term. So for some people, COVID would have been acute, and maybe they would have been in bed for a few days or a week or so. But for others, that acute illness has turned into a chronic, long-term issue. And again, like we said, mental ill health and physical health are all equal. It's a continuum. And actually, we can't separate the body and mind. We are all one physical being. We're all one network of cells. So where you sit on that continuum could be totally different. It might be that you know that when you feel down or low, your body aches more. It might be that if you have chronic pain, for example, and those days where you've had a flare up in response to stress, you're going to feel more mentally unwell. You're going to feel maybe lower or more frustrated or angry. So there's always an interaction between the two aspects in this matrix. And I guess I want to highlight really that it's an intensely personal experience, ill health, because it's quite difficult to actually measure what something is like for each of us as an individual. But I think it's really important to try and hold in mind that we don't need to be defined by an illness or a label or a diagnosis. It is part of us, but it's not necessarily the whole of us. And that in itself is quite an important thing to, hold to heart. You are more than your illness. Okay. So I've got a short video clip here, assuming it all works. Really just give a little bit of an insight. It comes from Mind, the mental health charity, which have some really excellent resources on there. And it's 3 parents talking a little bit about their experience.
I think there's a bit of a fear that when you're going through normal struggles of parenthood, that people are going to judge you more because you've got mental illness. They're going to say, well, they can't cope because they've got this condition, when it's actually just something probably that everyone goes through. And you're just having a bad day and the house is upside down and there's a screaming child and they're having a tantrum and you think, oh no. But if I tell someone that I'm not coping today, they're going to think, well, it must be because you've got bipolar. Whereas it's just the fact that everyone has really shit days and, that comes out.
I have a problem with people seeing my self-harm scars on my arms. So occasionally, I mean, I don't tend to worry about it too much anymore, but maybe on a Monday morning in the summer I might be wearing a t-shirt and I still catch myself thinking, maybe walking at the playground, my arms behind my back. But and I do feel that, my daughter lives in a little village near where I live, and the village school, there's quite a few parents that know me from school. So I do feel judged in the playground, but I'm confident that Lily's personality and Lily's achievements at school will kind of quash any kind of he's a bad father, because I really am not. But because you get used to hiding it and masking it to so many people, when you actually do tell people what you've been through, they're like, oh, I didn't even realise you look
normal.
Yeah, you're so together.
But the biggest thing that I find hard is I was always brought up as in you go to work, you support your family and whatever. And for the last 4 years now, I haven't been able to work because of my mental health. And not showing Zane that way, although he saw it in his younger years, has sort of been hard for me. I'm lucky he's got the other side of the family that are all working and what have you. But it's actually turned out that he's very proud of me for what I do for Mind and what I volunteer for Mind in the centre and drive, and he's very proud of me for that. So yeah, it's come out of a different way, so to speak. Yeah.
I didn't think in the first year of her life that I was going to ever get to terms with being a parent. I couldn't even call myself a mother for a year. I just hated using the word because it didn't feel like me. It felt alien. And now I can quite happily say, yeah, I'm a mum and I have a daughter. And to be able to say that now, it's just so rewarding because I didn't think I'd get to that place.
Sometimes you feel you're winging it, and sometimes I make mistakes, but it's perfectly all right to make mistakes because we make mistakes in our lives all the time. She tells me now, Daddy, if everybody were perfect, life would be boring. I'm like, well,
yeah,
damn, I'll take it from my own daughter now. So, but yeah.
If you get to the end of the day, if I get to the end of the day and she's happy and she's alive, I've pretty much done okay today.
Yeah,
that's kind of the thing.
Yeah. Don't put pressure on yourself, I say.
Okay, I love that. Oh, hang on. I've managed to press something slightly wrong. Oh, no, that's better. It has worked. That's okay. There we go. So I'm going to move on to looking at a little bit more about illness. But actually, I love that because I think it highlights some of the dilemmas we have about what's related to what, Am I struggling because of an illness or because of something that I'm carrying with me? Or even if I was completely healthy, would I still be struggling? And for those parents that don't have an illness, they're struggling for different reasons and different weights and different reasons. So I think it's always useful to hold in our heads that there's often many different factors that interact. And actually, being a parent with ill health doesn't make you any less of a parent, and it doesn't reduce the opportunities that your children can have and the potential for your children. There's nothing, we never found any evidence that says that children that grow up in a house with illness are less happy or less secure, or they might have more worries and they might have different ones, but it doesn't mean you're a bad parent per se. And so what that video also showed me was that idea that we don't always know who is ill and who isn't ill either. So, I guess for many of you out there, a lot of conditions are invisible. People won't know what's going on inside your gut or inside your head. We can seem, and very often people are very good at putting on an exterior front and putting on a mask as well. So we seem happy and healthy on the outside, whilst we're carrying something else inside, whether we're in pain or we're struggling in other ways. And I think that's also something that can, when things are invisible, other people don't necessarily recognize or acknowledge, or I guess show consideration sometimes as well. And I think that's always a tricky situation as well, because it's difficult to know when do you explain to someone and share what's going on for you, and when do you not. So now I think my screen's just gone funny, so bear with me. I'm going to stop the share and start again. Hold on. Not sure why that happened. Let's just see. Okay. Hopefully we're back and it's sorting. So one of the things I'd like you to ask you to think about now, just as we're talking through it, is think about what is the impact of your illness on your everyday, and in particular on the everyday of parenting, because it will be different for all of you. And thinking through what makes it harder to be the parent you want to be can be a really useful exercise. It can be really a good thing to do. So one of the things that frequently comes up is the idea and the fact that actually illness can take up a lot of energy and really reduce the energy that you have to share or be involved in tasks. Actually, sometimes just getting through the day is a real challenge. And I don't know if many of you have heard of the spoon theory. And we're going to look at a video on it in a minute. But it's a really great way of describing what it's like to have limited energy and how that can impact on what you're able to do in a day. So presence is another aspect that can really be impacted by illness. And it can be impacted either by your ability to sort of focus and pay attention to your child, or it can impact on actually whether you're physically able to be there for them, and whether you're in bed and they're at school, or they're outside playing. So there's a range of different ways that your illness might impact on how you'll be able to be present with your child. Your ability to move. Have you got an illness that makes it really difficult, that causes pain when you move? Or, is there a challenge trying to catch up with your toddler that's decided to run down the road if you've got a broken leg or pain in your knees? So there's some really, really practical aspects to this. And I would like to say there is absolutely no right or wrong as we go through this discussion as well. So movement is another key aspect. And then boundaries is the fourth one that I've chosen to highlight today. Because when we're tired, it can be much harder to stick to our rules, or stick to what we have said. So for example, 2 days before, we had an issue with our child going on to, I don't know, YouTube when they'd been told not to. So you've removed their phone because you're putting in a boundary. But 2 days later, actually something's ramped up, something's triggered you, you're feeling worse. And it can be much, much harder to stick to that. And the temptation can be to just give in, give the phone back. Or even, I think, on a day-to-day level, the energy that maintaining boundaries put in can be a real struggle. And the reason it's so important is because one of the things that children need to feel safe, and this is the same right the way up through teenage years as well, is that they want us to be consistent. They find safety in having a predictable world. So knowing when mom is going to take the phone away or when dad is going to ground them is really important. But it's something that can really be impacted on how we feel, whether it's physically or mentally. So I hope it's all right with you if I talk about physical and mental illness interchangeably as we go through this. I know they're very different experiences, they can be, but I feel like there's no, they still both have an impact on parenting. So I hope that's okay. So the next little clip we're going to see is spoons. So
I couldn't work out why I was so tired all the time, but I was just trying to do everyday things and just powering through, thinking I was just being weak. And it was then that she told me about the spoons theory. It was a girl with lupus originally, but it applies to any chronic illness. And she'd gone out for a coffee with one of her friends, which was a rarity for her. And a friend had said, "You're no fun anymore." And she said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, every time I ring you up and ask you to come out," she says, you always have to say you can't come." And she looked around the room and she went around, she gathered up all the spoons and she handed to them. She says, "Right." She says, "Every time we're going to go through an ordinary day," she says, "and every time you do something that's going to use a unit of energy, put a spoon on the table." So she says, "Right, you wake up in the morning and you've got to work yourself up." So she put a spoon down. You go have a shower, she put another spoon down. You come back and get dressed. She says, some of these would take 2 or 3. And she went through an ordinary day, and then she said to her, "Right, you get home and your friend rings and said, 'Do you want to come out for a drink?' And her friend looked, she says, 'Well, I've got no spoons left.' She says, 'No, exactly.' She says, 'I need to know how much energy I can expend in an ordinary day, and then I've got to manage it. And sometimes I just can't do things because there are things that you can't not do.' And she says, 'I've got to, yes, you can save some, you can bank some from a few days, but not a great deal. And if you know you've got something coming, you try and bank as much as you can and then dip into the next couple of days, but you know you're going to be flattened by it.' So I went home and started my own spoons diary, so I knew roughly what my outgoings were and then just tailored my day to it, and it just makes such a difference. You don't feel so useless.
that's a great video, isn't it, by the NHS? And I think it certainly helped me as someone who hasn't experienced what it's like to have that lack of energy over the long term. Really gave me a concept to understand and to help it make sense to me, which I found really useful, to be fair. And I think as well, it's a useful way of, learning how to pace yourself, thinking about what parts of the day are special to you and do you want to really be present for in your child's life. Because that is a really good way of thinking about how to prioritize your spoons, if we're thinking about it in the context of parenting. And I think as well, to be fair to yourself, be realistic about how many spoons you have, because it will be different, and it might be different on different days of the week. It might be different on different times of the month. And the more we're able to have that understanding, the more we're able to plan, actually, and work with the resources that we have. Now, there we go. I don't know why it's doing that. May come off videos. It gives me a heart attack each time. So we spent a bit of time talking about thinking about how your own illness impacts on your parenting and those 4 main aspects that I've asked you to think about. I thought we'd move on now and look at what our children actually need. And I love Snoopy. I always have. And I think it's so true. To make a difference in someone or our children's life, we don't need to be brilliant or rich or beautiful or perfect. Actually, we just need to care, and I think as well, we need to show our care in whatever way is that our children can see and understand, and B, what fits with us, what fits with our culture, what fits with our background, what fits with our upbringing as well, within reason. So I think, understanding that the key aspects that show our children that we care and that we're there is being able to give them a bit of time. Okay, even if it's time that's not necessarily doing anything, but being there, being able to be warm, to have the affection, to think about consistency, sorry about that they need. So that idea that, that you are mum, and as far as possible, you might be mum with different moods or dad with different moods, but you are still that same person throughout all of that. And being able to understand that, to be able to predict how you would respond. And that's particularly really, really useful, especially when they're younger, because that is, as I said earlier, a core feature of feeling safe. The idea that our children need some forms of explanation, some forms of communication. They need to understand where they fit into the story of the family and the story of their world, that it's absolutely okay for your children to understand that you have an illness or that you are different in some way from other people that they know, and using language that helps it fit into their own age range is really useful. There's some fantastic books and resources out there that can help children make sense of the differences in people's lives, especially once they get to school and they begin to realize that their parents might not be the same as other people's parents, or that some children have different lives to others. Children need a bit of play in an ideal world, be that a shared video game at the park, game of cards, or even just I Spy. Just that a little bit of interaction that's carefree and that's lighthearted. And then, of course, what they also need is the basics, food, shelter, warmth. And in fact, to be totally fair, you all need the basics too, as far as possible. So, that is we're talking about them in terms of what our children need, but kind of they're what we need too, as well as human beings. We think about their needs, we can then think about how we can meet them in the situations and within the ways that we can, and within the spoons we have as well. So I don't know what's going on. No parent is perfect, which I think is absolutely a valid point. And I'm just going to see, I'm going to stop the share again. My apologies. Not really sure why every time I use a video it goes weird afterwards. But right, I've obviously pressed something. Bear with me. Stop share. All right, try again. I'm obviously clicking something. See, suddenly it's back to the right size. So we've talked about what our children need. The one thing we didn't talk about was the idea of how good a parent they need us to be. And actually, what we know from research from the mid-19th century, good enough is enough. All right. We don't need to have perfect lives. No child needs a parent that absolutely understands them all the time, or can give them exactly what they need every time they need it. And interestingly, what they found out is we only need to get and understand our child's signals and needs between about 50 and 75% of the time for our child to do okay and to be all right in life and to be secure. If we completely always get it wrong, then our child will struggle more. And if we're always there on the ball, spot on, actually, our child will also struggle, because they never learn to deal with situations where their needs don't quite get met. They don't build up the resilience that they need. So, if you get it right 50 to 60% of the time, brilliant, fair play. Okay. Definitely don't need to be perfect. Okay, it's absolutely fine to struggle, to get it wrong, and to have bad days, actually. And I think the key there is that a good enough parent is one who's able to sit down with the children and go, do you know what, we've had a bad day. This has been rubbish. How can we make the next 10 minutes or this evening feel a bit better? So there's something about the idea that when it goes wrong or you're not there, that there's a bit of time for repair. and for that child to know that things will change and things will be back. Like I said, someday a bad day is just a bad day. So this is a good one. So I like this because a key feature of a good enough parent is one that is able to see their children as their own individual, and to try and understand them for who they are. And then they'll grow up into adults that can do that for others. And I'll come back onto that as we go through. You'll see why we brought that back. And also that idea that good enough parents are those that are able to have the space in their own head to think about how that child's childhood is, as well as what they're going to be like as an adult. And I think sometimes one of the challenges, if you're ill or if you have a terminal illness, is to be parenting too much to try and create the child you want, turn your child into the adult you want them to be, rather than parenting them in the moment. What was the make a difference? Hang on 1 minute. The make a difference quote was a Snoopy quote, I believe. Bear with me, I will try and find that out for you late in a bit. And this is what I was saying about getting it right about 50 to 60% of the time. You know, you could provide your child with the help that their child needs and wants, but not too much or too little. Actually, it's just being there. And I guess we focus on the idea of being a good enough parent because we live too much in a world of ideals and perfect, and this is so wonderful. And often, actually, other people's lives on social media look so much more wonderful together than our own. That it's really good to remind ourselves that, you know what, it's all right to just be human, and that's okay. So I'm going to move on now, thinking about tips to help, okay, and to think about the idea of how's your illness impacting on the certain things that our children need. So one of the things we highlighted was the idea that our children need communication from us. So they need communication and need to know that significant people around them have an understanding of their situation. Secrets are really hard on children as they think they have to keep it all in. And think about, what does your family know? How do they talk about your illness? Does the school understand what it is? Does the school understand what limitations it might have on you? Or do they have expectations that are just more than you're able to provide? So thinking about what communication is needed around your illness is a really useful way of reducing your child's worry and anxiety, because actually they can ask questions about it, they can be curious about it, and also they don't have to hide anything from their friends to a degree. Now, the other thing that can be impacted on in terms of communication by illness is when a parent is required or needs to withdraw from parenting for a period of time, whether they need to leave the room, go to bed, or just have time away. And helping your child understand that can be really helpful for them, because that way you can make sure that they don't blame it on themselves. You can also think about other ways where you can perhaps withdraw to recoup a bit of energy, but in their presence as well. So being next to them whilst they watch a TV program, so that you're there, but they're occupied. You're not having to expend energy to engage with them. Thinking about things like, for example, if tinnitus is something, or you find yourself very sensitive to noise, thinking about ideas about how you can be present and communicate them through paper, through writing, through things that don't involve triggers to your own illnesses and to your own challenges. So I think that's another aspect where communication is really important. Age appropriateness I've mentioned earlier, but that is useful, and there are fantastic resources, both actually interestingly on YouTube as well as in terms of books and stories. And often schools are a really good source of written resources and storybooks to help children understand a whole range of differences and difficulties and illnesses as well. And actually, to be fair, some of those can be really useful to share with friends and family and teachers and a whole range of people. So, for example, there's a really quite powerful YouTube video called "I Had a Black Dog," which is all about depression, and it's about how it's a weight, it's a shadow, it follows you through your day. And that is a way of helping someone who has no experience of what you're going through try and gain an insight or an experience. The actual way we communicate can be affected by how we're feeling. Absolutely. You might find yourself snappier or more tearful, and trying to help, verbalize to your children, do you know what? I know mummy looks like she's really, really sad, and you can see these tears, but you know what? I am all right. I'm just having one of my days or one of my moments. Okay. I think for those of you who go through monthly cycles, explaining PMT or perimenopause or menopause actually can be really valuable and useful to a child, especially if, for example, you've got menopause and puberty going on in the same household, trying to pull apart that, I am feeling like I want to rage against the world. And I know it's nothing to do with my daughter. It's just that's what's going on in my body at that moment and in that time. So by communicating it, you reduce all sorts of unsaid worries and anxieties. And noticing your own thinking as well. So if you find yourself thinking things like, oh, for God's sake, or just stop it, you're really hurting me. Noticing those thoughts and thinking, do you know what? They don't mean to hurt me. This isn't intentional. This is just part of how my illness is impacting on the situation. And noticing those thoughts can give us the time and the space to breathe out for a long time, bite our tongue, do whatever it is we need to do to help us just, I guess, actually, to be honest, sometimes rein ourselves back in. Because I think it's reality, isn't it? We're human. And then the last aspect, really, I was thinking about communication, is about thinking about our language. And I kind of just drew attention to that, but thinking about the idea of how we say things. So if our toddler is banging every saucepan in the kitchen, saying, stop it, you're making mummy's head hurt, actually can leave that child feeling like it's their fault and carrying a weight of your illness. Whereas saying something like, I would really like you to stop it because the quiet's really good for mummy. Again, that's bringing them in. It's asking them to do something to help you. It gives them a little empowerment, and it shifts away any risk that they're going to feel like things are their fault. So support networks are a key aspect. And again, depending on our thoughts and feelings about them, some of us have more support than others. But it's, they're really valuable in many, many different ways. So we know that, as long as our child, as that lady said earlier, is safe, fed and feeling okay at the end of the day, you've done good. Now, if you're not able to put the support in around your child at that time, then it's really important to think about who else is around that can do that. Okay. Is there another parent that you're sharing parenting with? Is there a really close friend who could co-parent a little bit, or grandparents, aunts, whoever it is? Because actually, it can be easy, especially as single parents, to feel like we need to do all of the parenting on our own. But there are many other things that people can help us with. So, for example, if you're at your end of the tether and you're running out of spoons, if Granny could chat to your child for a little while, or virtual babysit, or there's many different ideas that you can bring in other people to help. And also, I think that if people understand what you're experiencing, think about asking people who will be helpful, rather than those people that it might feel like it's going to be too difficult to ask, because sometimes asking for help is a double thing, but we'll get onto that. The other thing about a support network is planning for emergencies. So if you have an illness, I do apologize, it's done it again. Screen hasn't changed for a while. Has it changed since? please. Let's see. I will just check on my chat. Yes, it has. Thank you very much. Okay, that's cool. So yeah, planning for emergencies is a really useful thing, especially if you have slightly older children that can use telephones, children that understand about ambulances. So if you're living with epilepsy or with a condition that means that you could fit, or you could faint, or you could pass out, having a structured plan in the house so that your child knows what to do and who they can contact is a really useful thing, both for your own safety and your own well-being, but also for your child, because actually, if the worst happens, they know what to do. And it can be tricky. It might be that your support network is, if this happens to mummy, if mummy falls on the floor, call 999 or run to a neighbour. Or it might be something quite different. It might be a plan that's not necessarily about an emergency, but a plan about, on the days that mummy finds it hard or daddy finds it hard to get out of bed, this is the plan. This is what the plan will be for the day. So I think if you don't have a support network, there's definitely things that you hopefully will be able to do to help build one. But I think 999 is the obvious one. If that's for direct medical help and support. I think also that it's worth trying to talk with the school or with your GP about sort of third sector, voluntary sector organisations who can help you if there is no family around, if you haven't got family close, because not all of us have. We live in a giant world now. We all move around, and actually if we've grown up in another country and we're living here, it can be really hard without our family. I'll give some more thought to that question, Prue, as well, because I think we've got the crisis situation, so it is definitely the neighbours, the GP if they're open. If it's mental health, 111, I think it's 111 plus, not one, I'd have to look it up. Press 1, I think, is the and you go through to some professionals who can support with mental health on that one. But it depends where you are locally as well, and whether or not you feel able to try and make some links with local people, churches. I think, it can be something really simple, like if this happens to mummy, run to the shop. If you've got a shop close by that will be open as well. So those are a few. And actually, to be fair, genuinely, if I think, I would want to go around to my neighbours and say, look, this is my situation. There is a potential that this might happen to me. So if my child comes and knocks on your door, please, can you help them? And have those conversations. Because generally, people will look out for people, without a doubt. So thinking about who they can talk to outside of yourself can be a really nice thing and useful thing for your young people. Sometimes your children don't want to ask questions that might upset you, or they might see it as upsetting you. So maybe if they're slightly older, going into school, ask if they can link in with someone in a hub or the emotional support team. For example, ask, getting some psychoeducation around depression or anxiety can be really useful for them. And having a third person is great. Now, if it can be a granny or, the other parent, an aunt and uncle, a friend, equally, that can be really useful. There are alternate sources as well. You can, go onto the Mind, and they have information on all different booklets on how mental health affects all different people, written for all different ages as well. And if you feel you can't talk with your child about it, but you could leave it around, or you could sit down and watch some resources together on YouTube as well. If you know someone else who understands or explains it. So for example, cancer, there is a lot of research, not a lot of research, a lot of support out there through Macmillan, through Arthur Rank, through a range of different charities, who would be able to help children and young people make sense of what might be going on for one of their parents. And you'd be amazed at what children can understand and how children are able to deal with these situations. Actually, it's kind of better to sort of know enough to be able to make sense, and then you can cope with the day rather than wondering what's going on. And again, that ties in with this idea of empowering your child as well. So, allowing something to be open and to be talked about. So if you're living with, for example, a long-term heart condition, have conversations with them about what could happen, what they can do, what would they like to happen. If you're, so that they have a sense of empowerment, a sense of autonomy in the situation. And also, what can they do to help? Because within all of this, our children, if they're teenagers, there's going to be a limit maybe to what they're able to do to help, but you can give them ideas. It's about allowing them their own freedom to do their own life, but also allowing the opportunity to help and be part of how the situation's managed at home. Emotions are, I guess, tricky for all of us. Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Tasha. That's great. No, Bernardo's have some amazing stuff online. And there's, oh, my head's gone rubbish, but the Anna Freud Centre has some amazing stuff online. There is, I want to say Action for Youth, but I don't think it's called that anymore. But yeah, no, brilliant, Tasha. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Okay, so emotions, our experience to manage our emotions can be really challenging when we're unwell. And it can be challenging managing our own emotions, like we mentioned earlier, but also challenging to manage our children's emotions. And starting to notice your reactions when they start being worried or angry or sad is really useful. Because if you find yourself going, oh God, I can't deal with this, that that's a moment where if you can check yourself, much of an out breath as you can, it's all right, I can deal with this. It is okay. And I will, in doing that, you'll help your children go through puberty, go through their roller coaster of emotions as well. So, there is an important aspect of thinking about what we're feeling, but also having the belief that we're able to help our children roll through their emotions too. So, okay, tips, prioritize. Stating the obvious, but actually it's really important to weigh up what you think are priorities, like maybe how you're seen, or how other people would judge your home or your children. If, for example, you might be someone that gets up at 5 o'clock in the morning to mop your floors, or make sure that their child has an iron school uniform every time they go out, and you do washing every day. Have a really good think about it, because actually, what do you think is more important for your child? Is it more important to have that extra cuddle or that story or that little bit of time with you to them than it is for them to have an iron school uniform? And I think that's think that through with yourself, because sometimes we get caught up with, what we need, not them. Picking the 2 or 3 boundaries that you're really going to stick, and the most important ones. So people may well have heard this before, but if you've got 2 children, they're always fighting, it might just be really important to have boundaries. There's no hitting. And then you decide to just screen out the bickering for a period of time. Or it might be that, whatever, it's picking the 2 or 3 most important things, rather than wearing yourself out trying to follow all of the different boundaries and rules that you might do if you had more energy. What is it really important? Is it really important to you that your child, it follows instructions? Then that's a great thing. Stick to the following instructions. But again, decide what you are allowing to just let pass. We don't need to pick every battle. Difficult not to sometimes, though, especially when you think, oh my God, if I don't challenge it, they're going to turn into a criminal or something. But actually, do you know what? Most of our children won't. They won't. So sometimes it's all right. And you could even say, do you know what? I've seen you do that, and I hate it, but I'm not picking that battle today. So just clock it. So that sort of idea, you're there and you're holding them. And that does tie into this idea that the future can change. We don't have to teach our children everything in the moment at that immediate sense of time. Make shared memories, I think, is a lovely thing. You know, if it comes down to a choice of you've only got 2 spoons left and you have a choice of having some giggles or a hug versus, I don't know, cleaning the loo, you know, depending on the state of your loo, I'd go for the giggles and the hug. Manage your spoons. That's it, you know, kind of what the theme is. And there are some really nice ways you can manage your spoons, you know. Just cut, I suppose there's something about allowing yourself to have a bit of slack, so that, because then nothing is set in stone. And if you decide to have picnic teas in the sitting room so you can put your feet up for a week, that's okay, because the week after you can go back to having teas around the kitchen table or hand cook from scratch. You know, it's about finding what works and what is right for you. And if it works, then, and you're there and you're present, then that's a good thing. Okay, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Please do put any questions into the chat if you want. This is another little video. And I like this lady. She's kind of revolutionary. She's found a way of bringing compassion into the world, which frees up our headspace and our nervous system to allow us to function better on a day-to-day basis. So I'll let you listen to her. Hopefully, when I stop the video, it will all work again and I won't have to stop sharing, but we will see.
For me, I think that probably the overall picture is that self-compassion is an amazing source of strength and emotional resilience. And it's funny because a lot of people are afraid to be self-compassionate because they think it's weak, right? Self-compassion is for sissies. If you look at the research, you'll think again, because we know that people who are more self-compassionate have much more resilience to get through difficult times. Just to give one small example, we did a study of veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. We measured their self-compassion levels, and we also measured whether or not they developed post-traumatic stress disorder. And what we found is soldiers' levels of self-compassion was more predictive of whether or not they developed PTSD 1 year later than how much combat exposure they faced. So think about that for a second, what that says. That says it doesn't matter as much what happens to you as how do you relate to yourself when times are difficult. Are you an inner ally or an inner enemy? And most people are inner enemies. That voice in their head is constantly cutting them down, you know, saying you're not good enough, you screwed up, I hate you. All these voices in our head, we're constantly harming ourselves. What happens when you have a voice instead that supports you, that says, hey, you know, I love you anyway, it's okay, I'm here for you, I'll support you, what do you need right now? When that's a voice inside your head, it's an incredible source of strength and resilience, and that's what the research shows.
Can't put it any better. I think that being kind to ourselves actually gives us energy and it gives us strength. And I suppose in a way, you know, if we're nice to ourselves and gentle with ourselves, that's one less battle. We're not battling against ourselves. And there is some really interesting research that ties that into actually the activity of our nervous system and our immune system and all sorts of sides linked to that. So really worth thinking about that. You know, one of the ways to really help parent your kids when you're not feeling great is to be nice to yourself as well. Thank you very much. We will definitely send out the video afterwards. Take care. So embracing ourselves, being kind to ourselves, and treating ourselves like we would treat a good friend. You know, most people are generally pretty much okay. And so are our children. They're pretty much okay. They don't mean to make mistakes or do things wrong. So, done it again. Bear with me. There we go. Okay. So the final section of tonight's webinar is focusing on asking for help. And asking for help is a surprisingly tricky thing to do. It doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what your background is, how intelligent you are, how tall you are, how short you are, or whatever. There are a whole range of things that get in the way of asking for help, which is strange because do you know what? We ask Google for help all the time. And actually, often if we're lost, we would ask for directions. But somehow it seems to be extra tricky when you're a parent. So the first thing to think about is when to ask. Oh, okay, hang on, back one screen. I will try, Prue. That might prove trickier. There we go. Self-compassion. I'll send out a handout too as well. We've got your email, I think, Prue. Relieve the stresses of parenting. It's one less battle. We don't have to fight ourselves if we're being kind to ourselves. And also, if we've been kind and generous to ourselves, it's easier for us to be kind and generous as parents and impact. It impacts that way on our children. Okay, thanks for noticing that, Prue. I whizzed past that. Okay. So when to ask? When to ask is a key thing, because in an ideal world, it's before things get too bad. And it can be whenever you're struggling to meet any of the needs of your children, because actually there might be a really simple source of help or an answer that you just don't know. We only know what we know, don't we? We don't know what we don't know. I think in particular, if something is getting in the way of you being able to parent, so bigger worries and weightier, heavier things like debts, housing, what will happen in the future. Because finding a plan or coming up with ideas to answer some of those concerns, again, it frees you up, gives you some extra spoons. And yeah, before the situation gets worse. Because the lovely thing is, if you ask for help before it's really bad, it's actually much easier to help. And that's great for the people that want to help you and that are able to help you. So this is quite a list, really, of what to ask for. I was thinking, you know what? What would I ask someone to help me with? And funny enough, COVID was a really good example where actually all of the minor resources vanished for a period of time. And it was those things like someone bringing pizzas around, somebody offering to virtually babysit. Good question. I'll come on to that. Things like it's whatever is personal that will give you an extra spoon. So actually, going for a walk with an adult friend probably gives me another spoon to then help me be available for my child. So there's lots of different ideas. And it can be, there's some amazing stuff you can do online. Getting granny to try and make something in the kitchen with one of your children over WhatsApp can be a lovely way of building their relationship, getting a bit of break for you. Might be the downside of a messy kitchen afterwards, but that bit of space, they're good for your children as well as a bit of time for you. I think advice on anything you don't know is a really important thing to ask for. And it can be good to ask it online, but actually also ask the people around you, the people at school, the people at religious centres, charities. Charities are a great source, actually, particularly for health needs, because there are many individual charities dedicated to specific illnesses as well that would be much more tailored. I think the dilemma of you feel like you're always bothering people as they always make excuses is a really difficult one. And I guess my response to that is a couple of things. So it's thinking about, are you asking the right people? Or are you asking people to be able to give you something that is too much for them? That's the other side of it. Or are you asking them in such a way that allows them to give you excuses, if that makes sense? So, for example, if you say, so, really sorry, don't want to, definitely can email the presentation without a doubt. Don't mean to put you out. Is there any chance? Don't worry if you have to say no, but is there any chance you could pick John up from cricket? And by then you've already given them an out. So we'll come on to our last slide is about ways of of asking sort of assertively and clearly. I think also if they're making excuses, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because what makes me wonder is that sometimes people find it hard to say no as well, and that can be tricky. Now, I've got about 2 minutes left, so pop any questions in. We've got a slide now, which is the different types of barriers, which I'm going to whiz through. And then we've got a slide on actually how to ask for help. And I know that might sound a bit patronizing, but genuinely it's not, because sometimes just getting the words in the right order can be a challenge. But you'll get these on the slides. Think about what stops you. Now, for me, it was about being independent. It's about I should be able to do it all myself. It's about what if someone said no, and being kind of embarrassed as well. But at the same time, I actually quite like it when people ask me to help. And you know what? I actually quite like helping other people. You know, you get more endorphins and an immune boost from helping other people as well. So, you know, in a way, I would say, please ask. Okay, on to this idea of how we do it in the practice. And I've kind of broken it down into 3 main points, because sometimes it's about being really specific with what you need help with, and whether or not the person you're asking A can and is able to, or B is likely to. So say, for example, you have an ex-partner and they say they will step up and help you by coming round on and having the kids on Friday night, but you know that they are unreliable. Thinking that through, actually what you're thinking is you need help with some childcare once a week from someone who is reliable. And that way you avoid the disappointment when someone doesn't help. I think the idea about, you know, whether you're bothering people or not, you know what, sometimes we just have to. And I suppose we just have to trust them to say no if they can't do it. And take that risk. That is the risk, you know, there might not be people. And if friends and family and you haven't got that support network around it, it's worth looking out and looking wider till you can find a way of slowly building that network, you know, and be specific and be direct. So, you know, I need help with a meal on Thursday nights, or I need help with carrying my washing upstairs once a week. Would you be able to pop in after the school run on Tuesday and help me? So that, you know, for some people and some parents who are very busy, that's a very specific task. You can think, right, okay, yeah, no, on Tuesday morning, I can go and carry the washing upstairs. That will take me 10, 15 minutes, and then I can move on with my day. Thank you all for coming tonight. We have 3 more parenting webinars that are coming up. The next one is on the 30th of March, and that is parenting traps and how to avoid them, focusing really on our own habits and our own cycles. You know, when we get ourselves into a corner. We haven't confirmed the dates, but there are 2, one in May and one in July as well. Thank you for coming. At the end of the webinar, there is a feedback survey, so if you could complete it, I'd be really pleased. It really helps us tailor what we're doing next and how. I was going to put it in the chat, but I can't. How we can help you, you know, what would be useful, because I think that's the most important thing. But I hope you all have a good evening, and please do fill in the survey. All right, and I've now screen shared somewhere. Here we go. Let's stop the screen share. Thank you all for coming.